everyone. Once again, I'm Corey Dahl, the DDA manager. So we are just going to take this time to recognize our diversity champions of Lathrup Village. We are recognizing business owners, residents, and our community groups for the work of diversity and inclusion in Lathrup Village. So I'm just going to say a few words about each one and hand them their official letter about being a diversity champion here. So I'm going to start with our community organization down here, which is LGBTQ+ Social. This group was created by our residents, and Greg right here is one of them, and Ed London, and for Lathrup Village residents who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community to get to know other like-minded residents in our wonderful and diverse community. This group is planning social gatherings and creating a welcoming environment and inclusive community here where everyone is treated with respect. So I just wanted to give a shout out to our group here and congratulations.
Thank you.
And then next we have our adult resident, Grace Green. Grace has been a key supporter and instrumental to the development of the Juneteenth celebration in Lathrup Village. She is a volunteer for the Juneteenth Task Force and has provided lots of historical information and activities that are included in today's events. She has participated in other events that celebrate cultural diversity, including the Caribbean Fest. She's a big promoter and supporter of cultural events in Lathrup Village. Congratulations, Grace.
Hello, everyone. Happy Juneteenth. I want to thank God, the Downtown Development Authority, the Juneteenth Task Force, the City of Lathrup Village, the residents, my mother, family, and all my colleagues. This is an honor. I have 3 quotes I will share that have profoundly helped me along my life's journey. 1, each one teach one. If you know it, share the knowledge. Number 2, and I want to thank Maurice Skip Turner for those words of wisdom from the labor unions. Also, the next one is, the more you give, the more you receive, material, physical, and spiritual, without reservation, without hesitation. Just give. Just do it. It makes the world happy. I want to thank Gerald Kareem, Vice President, UAW Ford. And the last one. Lastly, if you help someone along the way, then my living won't be in vain. I want to thank my mother, Eleanor Green, Coffee County NAACP President. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful Juneteenth celebration. Oh, yes, I'm a Juneteenth baby. It is my birthday. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and then I'm going to recognize our business champion, Transformative Mind Counseling. Transformative Mind Counseling shows active support for the community, specifically creating spaces for people of color and their mental health. Transformative Mind Counseling has free community support groups for clinical interns of color in Michigan, and offers low-income counseling services and more. Aja has also founded the Michigan Black Therapy Fund, whose mission is to help connect Black clients with Black clinicians in Michigan for mental health services free of charge, while also creating professional networks for Black and people of color clinicians, increasing Black access to mental health services. In addition to her support to the community, she participates in many of our downtown development related events and is an active supporter of the community. Thank you. I just want to also do one little shout out for our youth resident, Alaya Siddiqui. She couldn't be here today, but she has done a ton of work in Lathrup Village. She's only a teenager, but has done so much. She's a key leader and participant in providing Black Lives Matter signs to neighbors, and also in 2017, the Hate Has No Home Here signs throughout Lathrup Village. She was instrumental in organizing the peaceful march in Lathrup Village to promote unity that attracted about 200 residents as well. So congratulations to her, and we wish she could be here today. Thank you, everyone. One last round of applause for our diversity champions. And then
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel right here. But before we get started, I want to read the City of Lathrup Village Proclamation, all right? City of Lathrup Village Proclamation declaring June 19th, 2021, Juneteenth Awareness Day. Whereas Americans of all colors, creeds, cultures, religions, and countries of origin, share in common love of and respect for freedom, as well as determination to protect their right to freedom through demographic institutions by which the tenets of freedom are guaranteed and protected, and President Abraham Lincoln first issued the Emancipation Proclamation, effective January 1st, 1863, freeing those enslaved in the South. However, Southern slave owners ignored that order. On June 19th, 1865, Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, and enforced the president's order, freeing the enslaved African Americans 2.5 years after it was first decreed. This day has since come to be known as Juneteenth. And over 150 years, Juneteenth National Freedom Day continues to be the most recognized African American holiday observance in the United States of America. And many African Americans continue the tradition of celebrating Juneteenth Day as an inspiration and encouragement for future generations. Juneteenth Day celebrations have been held to honor African American freedom while encouraging self-development and respect for all cultures. And this year marks the first Juneteenth event entitled Unity in the Community, a celebration of cultural diversity that being held in Lathrup Village, an event that will feature entertainment, music, food, trucks, and a panel, as we have right now, discussion with community leaders. There will also be inaugural recognition of diversity champions in the categories of Lathrup Village business, resident, and also a community group. Therefore, to be resolved, we want to thank the mayor, Mikkel Kelly Garrett, together with Mayor Pro Temp Bruce Cantor, City Council, City Council Mayor Ian Salim, and Donna of the City of Lathrup Village. Hereby declare of the 19th of June 2021 to be Juneteenth Awareness Day in the City of Lathrup Village. Also, to be further resolved that we express our appreciation to Juneteenth Task Force and DDA Promotions Committee. We encourage all to recognize the historical significance of Juneteenth Day, support the continued celebration of Juneteenth Day to provide an opportunity for all people to learn more about the past, to better understand the experiences that have shaped the nation, and encourage the people of the City of Lathrup Village to observe Juneteenth Day and participate in the ceremonies, activities, and programs. This attests to this day, 17th day of May 21. Thank you. Now, as we get started with the panel, we're going to introduce our community leaders.
Hi, everyone. I'm State Representative Kyra Bolden. I represent Michigan's 35th House District, which is Southfield, Lathrup Village, Beverly Hills, Bingham Farms, and Franklin.
Good afternoon. Make sure it's on. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm State Representative Tyrone Carter. I represent District 6, which is everything downtown, Indian Village, Belle Isle, the entire cities of Ecorse and River Rouge, and I'm honored to be here today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sheila Johnson. I'm the Chief Judge of the 46th District Court in the City of Southfield, but serves the cities of Southfield, Lathrup Village, and the communities of the villages of Bingham Farms, Beverly Hills, Franklin, and Southfield Township. And in the 21st century, I became the first African American to be elected to serve in the 46th District Court and the first African American female district court judge to serve in Oakland County, Michigan. And so I'm really looking forward to talking about this topic because it really has a lot of, it's very germane to where we are today and where we're headed. So thank you for having me.
Good evening. I'm Loretta DeLoche, and I'm here to represent 40 years of living in Lathrup Village.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's already get started with the conversation right now. So I'm gonna ask you guys one by one. I mean, you guys, don't be shy. What is Juneteenth Day to you, and how did you learn from it? About it, I should say.
Being a gentleman, ladies, you guys.
Judge?
Well, okay. They threw me under the bus here. Okay. Well, I can't even remember when I first learned of Juneteenth. It's just been that long ago. It's become very popular in recent years, but, I studied Black history in high school, and so I think I probably learned about it back then, and I've been following the celebration for years now. And we've celebrated it at my church and a lot of other different places. So I can't pinpoint the exact time, but it's certainly nothing new to me. I made a few notes about really what it means to me, because when you think about the fact that, the 13th Amendment, ended slavery. This happened in January 1st of 1863. It took 2 years later for the Confederate states, especially Texas, to actually free our people. So for me, it means that it is a freeing of us physically as an African American population. But the shackles of slavery potentially are still among us. When you think about all of the things that are going on in today's world and how we are still struggling to maintain voting rights, we exercise our rights legally, and then suddenly legislation pops up to stop us from doing that. So for me, it's a view of, and I think I wrote it down for myself. It's showing that we celebrate the past and the emancipation of everybody in 1865, but it's a reminder for me that words alone cannot deliver freedom and cannot deliver individual rights, and it cannot deliver equal justice for all. That our nation has come a long, long way, but we still have a whole far amount to go. And I'll let others talk about it too, and I'll probably expound upon my points about some of the things and challenges that we're still seeing, even though we are technically not physically bound.
All right, you're just going to kick it to me. All right. Yes, please.
Back at you.
Round of applause for Judge Johnson.
Yeah, clap that up.
Yes. Like Judge Johnson, I can't pinpoint the exact time I learned about Juneteenth. I know it's been years, though, just living in our community that has just gives a very robust history going to Southfield Public Schools. But what I will say is that Juneteenth means to me is not only a celebration of physical freedom, as Judge Johnson stated, but just a remembrance of we still need to break down the systems of oppression that still exist. So even though we are physically free on Juneteenth, they instituted black codes, which basically regulated where black places or the newly freed people could work and how much they could work for. And then we all know Jim Crow laws, which did similarly, and for those that gave opposition were jailed or killed. And so we're still dealing with systems of oppression today, and I think that it's a reminder that we need to do everything in our power to dismantle systemic racism.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad they're talking because I'm telling you, I knew nothing of Juneteenth until recently. It was years ago, I was in the islands, and they had this big Juneteenth celebration. That was over probably 30 years ago. And I got back home, and I didn't hear a thing about it until recently. I cannot believe I just never heard anything about it. Mm-hmm. But it was a big celebration in the islands. I was either in Africa or the islands. So I'm glad I know about it now, but I can't speak on it because I didn't know anything about it until recently.
See what happens when you go last, they answer the question for you. But when I found out about it, I may have been in college, and I had a Black Studies class, and I'm not going to tell my age, but that was some decades ago. But I found out more about it because for the last 12, 13 years, I've taken a group of kids on an HBCU tour. Every Easter vacation, we go on a Black college tour. So as we go to these different places, you really learn about the history. And not what's in the books, because a lot of it is not in the books, but the real histories, the real struggles, how some of the HBCUs were started by slaves. So when you get that rich history, it makes you proud, but it also makes you angry as far as we've come But what Juneteenth means to me is recognition. There's been pieces of it, the puzzle, all around maybe the world, smaller communities. When you heard the grandmother, what is her name, Miss Opal Lee, say she would go to places. So a lot of people didn't know. But what this does, making it a holiday, gives it that recognition so that people will have the thirst to find out what else don't we know so that we can move this forward. So to me, recognizing it is huge because a lot of people still have no idea until this very month, until this very day.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. I want to go by and ask all you guys, but particular to Loretta. You've been a long-time resident of Lathrup Village, and obviously, you know, being here for a long, long time. Can you describe of any progress or any changes that you have seen in the city of Lathrup Village?
Well, excuse me. I really, truly have not seen a lot of changes in Lathrup Village, except for the demographics. Other than that, I love living here, and it's a great place to live. And I like it because of the diversity and the fact that we can communicate with our city officials. It's good for them to know, it's good that I know them and good for them to know me, and that you can deal with the police officers and everything. But other than the demographics, I haven't seen a lot of change in Lathrup.
For the rest of the panel, can you guys answer that question as far as the district?
Well, I can talk a little bit about Lathrup Village. You know, it started out as a very non-diverse community, as you all know. And there were a lot of restrictive covenants, which meant that you really probably could not sell your land to someone of a different ethnicity than who already owned it. And so, you know, the brick wall was built around the city to block it from the city of Southfield, you know, as a stratification there as to we are who we are in Lathrup, and we want to keep the African Americans and anybody else out of the city. And so that's kind of sort of, you know, the history of the city. And so I think from those humble, divisive beginnings, we have seen a change to the extent that, you know, there's a lot of diversity now in the city. You have leadership in the city that's been very diverse. You have, you know, your city manager is very diverse, and your mayor is, and, you know, you have the benefit of the history of where you were to help you determine where you want to be and how inclusive that you want to be. And I think that Lathrup Village has really shown that they've stepped up into the 21st century and has made, you know, concerted efforts to be that all-inclusive city. So I think there's been a lot of change since the beginnings, humble beginnings of the creation of this little city. And I can only see very good things going into the future. So I'm going to leave my comments specific to the city of Lathrup Village, and maybe they'll expound upon them a little bit broader.
So I know I look like a teenager today, particularly with my hair up, but I've lived in Southfield all my life, and so obviously adjacent to Lathrup Village all 33 years, folks. I'm not a child, but I say all that to say is I've seen great change in this community, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to run for office and represent this community in Lansing. You know, when I was in high school, or even when I was younger, as Judge Johnson stated, there was less diversity. But now in Lathrup Village, as well as surrounding communities, there's such a rich diversity that I love living in this community, and I love representing you in Lansing because of that. You know, just going to some of the events last year, just the Black Lives Matter marches, the celebration of LGBTQIA community. There have been great strides in this community, and I appreciate the inclusiveness, the diversity, and the strides for equity that we are looking towards today.
So how do I answer that from coming from Detroit, Ecorse, and River Rouge? Well, easily. I think that if we go back, there were only certain places that blacks could live. I know I was born in a black hospital. I didn't know that until I got older. So we've been restricted to areas where we could live, where we could be born, even where we could be buried. So I think that the natural evolution and change has come out here, because what I see in most ring cities outside of Detroit, they're far more diverse than they were 10, 15 years ago, which is interesting because I was living in Corktown for a few months, and that's probably as diverse as I've ever seen Detroit as well. So we're making changes, but we've got a long way to go when we talk about things. Maybe we'll get into it with voting rights, police reforms. Yeah. What we're caught up right now in is a moment. Juneteenth is a moment. But I think that the death of George Floyd and the young people that have been energized is going to make this a movement.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to ask you, particular to the city, when y'all first came here to Lathrup Village, did y'all ever feel welcome?
Well, I did. I mean, I did. I feel very welcome when I came, and I've felt that all since I've been here. I joined the Lathrup Village Women's Club, and there were like 3 blacks in there, but they welcomed me open arms and took some of our suggestions. For instance, we now do Goodfellow dolls. They had never heard of it. How many know about Goodfellow dolls out there? Well, the ones that know about Goodfellow dolls, and I received Goodfellow dolls as a kid until I was 14. You're supposed to stop at 13, but I got an extra year in there. And so that was my Christmas. I mean, my dad died when I was only 5, so my mom had 4 kids to raise. So my Christmases were really good only because of the Goodfellows. So when I came here, when I was at the telephone company, I was the coordinator for the Goodfellow dolls. They're doing my 35 stellar career started with Michigan Bell, SBC, Ameritech, and then retired 33 years ago from AT&T. But I coordinated the Goodfellow dolls there. So when I came here, I asked them, could we do the Goodfellow dolls? And they looked at me like, what? So I told them, I had somebody come from Goodfellows, discuss the dolls and everything. And so now, in this year, we're doing 40, our little club, we only have 24 members, but we're doing 40 Goodfellow dolls for the Detroit Goodfellows. Oh. But I felt welcome. I introduced, they had fashion shows, no music. Well, here again. I told them, I said, I came to Lathrup. The reason I came here, I wanted to add a little color to the group. But no, nevertheless, we had fashion shows. Now, can you imagine a fashion show with no music? I mean, we don't have to have this. You have to have something decent, But so anyway, I introduced music to the fashion shows. And then the ladies, first they would get up there, and they just walk up, walk back. So I had to change that, had to get them some movement in them and everything. But I was well received, in my opinion. And then I became the president years later, 30 years later. I became the president of the Lathrup Village Women's Club. And now I'm on the Lathrup Village Advisory Council. So, I mean, I just think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. And like I said earlier, we're fortunate enough that you can live a place, then you could know the mayors and the city council people and the police officers and be friendly. It's nice to know them. It's good that they know you as well. But years ago, when they were talking about blacks didn't live here, when Louise Lathrup, who owned all of this, one lady, Louise Lathrup, they didn't allow Jewish people here, not us. So she would be turning over her grave by now, I'm sure. In fact, when I hear some noises late at night, I said, is that Louise coming? And for not to want Jewish people here and then to have us here, well, you can imagine what that's like. But I've always from the very beginning felt welcomed.
All right. Looking back last year, outside of COVID, we've had, Ahmaud Arbery who got shot and killed for no reason by an angry white mob. We got Breonna Taylor who got shot and killed by the police for no reason. Someone invaded in her house with her boyfriend as well. And then you have George Floyd, who died while everybody saw that on their phone, whether it's on TV. They say it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but it really was more than like 9 minutes, I believe. Still said, "I can't breathe," and still had a knee on his neck and died. And with all that, we've had many protests throughout this nation. The most since the Civil Rights Movement. I believe it's the most. And with that going on, and it's interesting that we've had someone say one time, would you still say Black Lives Matter, would you still say Black Lives Matter when it's no longer a trend? Because obviously you were seeing advertisement, corporate America just saying Black Lives Matter. You probably have Netflix and saw people say Black Lives Matter, and in the month of June, it was so much, and everyone still was talking, now was making the holiday of Juneteenth, popularized, before and last year. So I want to ask you guys, throughout just a year ago and now, what progress, what changes have you seen in locally, state-wise, and nation-wise since then?
So from our perspective, and Representative Carter will chime in, we have been, there's been a renewed effort to push certain initiatives that we've been pushing for a very long time, but now we have the public support to do it. I don't want to say that they're new initiatives. They're not. We've been talking about criminal justice reform for a very, very long time. I'm proud to serve on the Judiciary Committee, where we've been able to pass a number of criminal justice reform bills, expanding expungement, for example, which were extremely restrictive, and just making sure we are decriminalizing certain crimes to get people out of the system in the first place. But now there is a renewed sense of banning no-knock warrants, for example, which is something that has been introduced previously. We're doing a number of police reforms, but again, I think criminal justice reform has come to the forefront again, and I think the public support of that renewed sense has played a part in renewing a lot of those efforts. New efforts such as the Crown Act, which bans discrimination against natural hair, which I made it a point to wear my natural hair today, that has come to the forefront. And because we see kind of this backlash too from all of the protests of voter suppression laws and trying to ban critical race theory, which is really just trying to ban American history as it pertains to race, because we know our country's history. And so that doesn't help anybody to not know the history, because there's no way you can learn from that. So as much progress as we have seen in a renewed sense of some of the things that we've introduced in the past, we've seen a huge backlash from that as well, that we need to keep our eye on. So I encourage everybody to stay in the fight, fight for what you believe in, contact your local and or in your state and your federal elected officials. Make sure they know the initiatives that you want to see passed, because there's a lot we can do on the state level, but we need public buy-in in order to get it done.
If I may, thank you. My colleague, we really work hard, and you have to understand the dynamics of being in the legislature. There's 110 state reps. There's probably about, and the Republicans are 58 to 52, so they have the majority. So they pretty much determine what bills get heard, what laws get passed in that manner. So we're a minority. We're part of the Democratic Party, but it's only 15 of us that are black. So when I hear about Black Lives Mattering, it resonates with me because black lives haven't always mattered. They haven't. It was just, didn't matter what happened to black folk. So when I hear that, when young people say that, I get goosebumps sometimes, because now people get it. And understand that George Floyd did not create a local movement, a national movement. It was an international movement. They were talking about this all around the world. Probably because of COVID, nobody was distracted. We had nowhere to go. So it's all about timing and positioning. So what we've done, and I'm a retired police lieutenant from the sheriff's department. I had 25 years. So, and I am considered an expert. I've taught at the police academy. I've been to the FBI academy. What we haven't done in the state of Michigan is passed any laws of any consequence that would have saved George Floyd's life or held anybody accountable. We can talk police reform up here all day long. I've got bills that have been waiting to get a hearing in Lansing for 3 months. Now, to give you an idea, it's called Freedom of Information, and I'm working with the Innocence Project. When we hear about people that have been wrongfully incarcerated, the biggest reason is because they don't have access to records. So to give you an idea, I had a FOIA bill for police records and accountability, I want to say in March. I did a FOIA bill for the governor and lieutenant governor in April. It's already moved through the channels. We've had hearings. It's been voted off the floor. Ask me where my police accountability bill is. Because we can talk about laws and reforms all day long. But until you're held accountable for your actions, we're just talking. Because as a taxpayer, and I'm sure you all as taxpayers are tired of paying for police misconduct. $27 million in Minneapolis, and we're not going to talk about the damage. How do you get that back as a taxpayer? Derek Chauvin never should have been on the force, and he definitely never should have been a training officer. So we've got to address that immediately. But again, if we had to wait how many years for Juneteenth, we don't have that much time. So I need external pressure. If you all have some Republican friends, call them and say, why is everybody accountable but not police? And when we hear about immunity, qualified immunity, that came from the Watergate case. That was never about police. So we need to know our history. We need to know the intent so that we can address that, because policing is the most critical arm of any city, any state, any organization. You know who the police are, and we need to hold them accountable.
Well, I appreciate the changes that we've seen legislatively and that are hopefully still forthcoming. And I think Representative Bolden did a great job of just identifying some of the things that have gone on in the Michigan legislature in this last year during COVID and then now hopefully post-COVID. But the buck doesn't just stop there. Because this is a huge issue. You can do some criminal justice reform laws. They've made laws that have changed in pretrial release or bail reform laws, because if you think about it, most African Americans and people who are poor of color are the ones that are stuck, presumed innocent, but are stuck incarcerated because of the high bails that they're being set in courts. So this trickles down from the legislature into the court system and into the vision and the psyche of the judges that are that are working in arraignment courtrooms and in pretrial release daily. So there have been some changes there to get away from these high cash bonds and to look at, for most misdemeanor and low-level felony offenses, look at giving more personal bonds to allow the people, and there are ways to actually give a bond if necessary, but there's no longer the situation where you're just trying to hold somebody because of what the charge was, or try to hold somebody because of who they are. So now we have a little bit better perspective for judges generally, and a guideline for them to try to release people. Especially on minor misdemeanor offenses, which is what most of the district court has jurisdiction over. But there are also changes in expungement laws now that are coming forth, which means most of your African Americans that were convicted, rightly or wrongly, they have convictions, they were not able to work or to get jobs. And so that's changing now because the laws are such that you can expunge easily more than now. It was only one felony, and now it's changed. Now it's 2 felonies and misdemeanors, and it's going to be broader now. So this is going to give people an opportunity to have a chance to contribute economically to their communities, which you pay your dues at some point can't you be re-entered into life and work just like everybody else? Well, these changes are coming and have started. Even for young people, courts are now in a better position to be able to give them an opportunity not to have a record anymore. If you're between 17 and 21, there was a law called the Youthful Training Act that allowed courts to, in their discretion, allow a young person that's charged with a crime to just plead guilty, go through some rehabilitative efforts, be placed on probation, and then not have a record at the end, so that they could walk away, go to college, get a job, get financial aid, and none of this is like, a red mark on their forehead. Well, now that was extended with consent of the prosecutor, so the courts did lose a little bit of discretion when it was extended up to age 24, and now it's been extended now up to 26, I believe, that's coming up. So there are a lot of changes in this last year legislatively that have happened. But within the judiciary itself, there is a renewed sense because of all of the reform. And the judiciary at the Supreme Court has, weighed in to the legislators and tried to weigh in on what their thoughts were on some of these laws. And I know that they were pretty much backing most of the positive changes that you see occurring. And now within the court system itself, there is a move towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this, there's a big work group that has just been formed. So within this last year, and I'm actually on that work group now, and we are looking at all of the changes that need to be made from the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, all the way down in the judicial system. And that's about who we hire, getting more diverse people to get into these jobs. How do we attract them? Just making people feel more comfortable in the workplace now. So there's a lot of change that's going on behind the scenes that you might not know about that is, I think, as a direct result of these movements that have started. And, Black Lives Matter, yeah, that's a moniker, but I don't think it's really new. It's new from the standpoint of, it's a catchphrase. And people are being killed, but people have always been killed wrongly. People have been killed wrongly by police for 100 years. So it's not a new thing, but I think, as both representatives have said, it's a new day and a renewed interest in it. Because when you look at all of the things that have happened in the law, they knew Black Lives Matter at some level legislatively. It just never trickled down to the actual people. So that's when you got the Voting Rights Act of 65. You got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You've got these things that are continually reviewed and renewed yearly and trying to ban discrimination in just about every area of life, down to voting, down to housing. I got a unique tale because I may not look as young as her, but people think I'm kind of young. But, I grew up in the early years. I was born in Detroit, but I grew up in a small town in Mississippi until I started school back here in Michigan. Now, my grandfather was the principal of a, quote, colored high school. So his job, and he moved in there at the request of a friend, to try to educate African Americans that were sharecroppers, which, as you know, was one step above slavery. And they were tied to the land, and they had to buy their way out of it. And so he was pretty much the everybody to everything to everyone in that community, because he was very well respected. But the schools were segregated, the town was segregated, but he was actually respected. My grandmother was the homeroom teacher for history, and then my mother taught English there. And so they graduated a whole lot of African American students who went on to do great things in many of the careers that we see now. And when you think about it, they started the beginnings of judges and lawyers and people like that would not have had to start if it wasn't for those, quote, colored schools, graduating folks, and then integration efforts that came in various different colleges. So I remember all of that as a little 4-year-old, and I remember going to the bathroom down the side of the road because I didn't know why. I thought it was normal, but you couldn't go into the gas station. You remember you pack all that chicken and food and you'd eat in the car because you couldn't stop at a restaurant. So I think those are the things that impacted me as to why I decided that I was going to go into the law as I got older and I saw all of this inequity that had occurred. So I think we can all see that Black lives did matter. They knew they mattered. And as we heard today, they started schools, and abolitionists and slaves started most of your HBCUs. They started schools to educate. They tried to pass these laws, and it just didn't trickle down until today with the new movement of Black Lives Matter, where you have, even though you had that bloody Sunday back crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, when everybody was beat down, you had integrated folks from the North that came down, but it wasn't anybody really in the South. So now you're starting to see folks everywhere, North, South, East, and West, that are stepping up and saying, what we're seeing now isn't right, it's wrong. So I don't know that this is new, but it's a new beginning and a new awareness that we see. And we are all living, I can't believe I've lived through and seen the changes, and I've benefited from the changes, quite frankly, because there were no African-American judges, very few, and very few lawyers couldn't even get work in the courts doing court-appointed work. So we've seen that change. I was one of 3 blacks in my law school section at the University of Michigan. I've seen that change. And this wasn't that long ago, you know? So I think we can see things moving along, and we just have to stay woke, as they say. Stay woke, you know? It's really awake, just telling my mother, who was an English teacher. I know that. But it's stay woke is the moniker that everybody's using now. So we stay woke. We don't let our guard down. We continue pushing the legislation. We support our representatives. You know, all politics starts local. These are the people you need to really be contacting, because, you know, the courts have to do what they tell us the law is, and they start locally. And then it filters up, really, is what happens. So you need to get in touch with these folks to make sure your voices are heard, and anybody who doesn't support what they're doing, you need to contact them and make sure that your voices are heard, because, you know, there's power in numbers of people, and that's what affects change, because, you know, slavery didn't end overnight, and all of those minds had to be changed to get us to the point where we are today. So it's a continuing movement, and we still have to educate our youth. Think about that, because they don't necessarily understand the struggle. So that's why I'm really glad Juneteenth is here, so that the young people can really get an understanding of how pervasive this slavery thing was, and it was going on 2 years after it was over. So those are just kind of my comments, really a little bit on how I see where we've come over the last year. And I really think it's just been a continuation of where we've been, but with a newfound, renewed strength and vigor and focus. And I think we need to make sure that we keep that so that we don't lose the ground, because every day something is happening that seems to want to put everybody back to no voting and things like that. So we don't want to lose that ground. We want to continue to move forward.
Go ahead, Loretta.
You said it well.
Okay. All right. So,
But I would say something not
oh,
about that.
okay. All right.
But going back to Lathrup Village, that's what I'm here to talk about, Lathrup Village.
Mm-hmm.
We did have, since I've been here, we did start having the Black History Month every program, and Dr. Martin Luther King Day. And then we did a Black Lives Matter protest, which I think is absolutely marvelous. And now we're adding Juneteenth, so we're on the move.
That's good. Listen, black people, since being in this country, has been fighting, to prove that they were human beings. After slavery, they fought, to make sure that they had their own businesses, entrepreneurship, hospitals, schools, etc., even education. Even during the Jim Crow laws, we wanted to make sure that we had equality, had the right to vote. And now we're in a situation where we're looking for more. just like, criminal justice system, trying to make sure that we can do something with the 13th Amendment, as we know. But I wanted to ask you this question, looking at, throughout the course of this country and also last year, do you see any real momentum, in actual changes and, and legislators and all this other stuff that Black people can say, we can be fully protected by law, which it should have been beforehand?
I would say yes. We have made great strides, and particularly in the last year or two, as far as what I've seen in the legislature, as far as prioritizing, like I said, criminal justice reform, for example. However, I think that with the movement that is going on, we need to go further. We need to absolutely go further. We need to go further much quicker. And so I think that with things like the Crown Act, we're focused on equity now. So we've said the thing, Black Lives Matter, and we've done reforms that kind of affect everyone. But now I think in 2021 and beyond, we need to focus on equity. And I'm proud that this movement is going on because it's opened the door to other conversations such as health disparities. And so I was a part of the governor's announcement that all healthcare professionals will receive diversity, equity, and inclusion training, for example, because mothers and babies are Black mothers and babies are 3 times more likely to die than those of any other race, which is akin to third world country levels. And why is that? Because of implicit bias. And so we're starting to see incremental change, but in order to save our very lives, from just police brutality or in our healthcare system or in these other things that we see on a day-to-day basis, just putting food on the table, we need to go much further, much quicker to save lives of everyday constituents, Michiganders, or people in this nation. And so, again, I encourage everybody to keep up the momentum. We cannot rest until we see the change that we wish to see. And we need your help. Myself and Rep. Carter, we go to work every single day. And when I say it's a fight, and you mentioned something, when people don't even see you as a full human being or as a full participant in the legislative process, every single time we go to Lansing, we are not seen as equal members of the legislature. But we fight every single day. And me and Tyrone have passed bills. We have bills signed into law. And we have to work 2 or 3 times as hard to make sure that happens because we're already starting off here. One of my first days in the legislature, one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said, "How did you get here?" Wow. And so it's a presumption that I didn't belong there. People that look like me don't belong there. And so we've had to work extra hard to make it known that we have credentials, we are smart, we are intelligent, we are well-read, and we have something to bring to the table. But we need your help. We cannot do it alone. With the reforms that we're talking about, as long as we're in the minority, we are subject to whatever the majority wants to pass, just like on the federal level. Whatever the majority wants is what the majority gets. And so we need your help. We are doing the work. We are fighting the good fight. And we need you to stay in the fight and help join us.
So how do I follow that up with the Homer here in her district? What we have to do is support one another. And, I have a mentoring program down at Wayne State, and we actually got a national award. But I do that because young people are fearless. Old people, we're a little afraid.
Careful.
I'm speaking for myself.
Be careful.
We've watched this too many times, and we know what's going to happen. Young people are fearless. They're not afraid. So what we have to do is build in guardrails for them. Because you think about this, in the city of Detroit, how many people came out and voted last year? we still may have the same president if it were not for Detroit and the voters that came out. So, you know, young people did that. And when I talk to young people, I say, hey, a protest without a plan is nothing but a parade. So we've got to give them the guidance and let them do what they do. They change things. When I was young, I would change things. And a guy once told me, in your 20s, if you don't challenge the system, then you have no heart. But in the 30s, if you don't figure out a way to work within the system, then you got no brains. So we've got to figure out how to harness that energy, because I'm in the legislature because of that energy. It was young people that went out and knocked doors. It was young people that, I'm still old. I write down phone numbers. Now, that's funny, right? Young people be like, hey, just give it to me or send it to me. This right here has really changed the way we operate. Because if it weren't for that young lady videotaping what happened to George Floyd, I promise you those reports would have said something totally different when they got back to the station. So we have to keep encouraging these young people. And a young man told me, and I'll stop on this, and it was kind of scary. He says, yeah, I'm standing on the shoulders of people that got me here, but the water is still too deep.
Shoot, sound like Killmonger right there, man. Like, man, bury me in the ocean where my ancestors were in, man. Because they knew, because they knew that death was better than bondage. Whew.
You know, one thing I wanted to say, and it's not really about the changes, the positive changes. It's about this, you know, undercurrent of things that are going on behind the scenes that you gotta, quote, stay woke on. And you're thinking about what you can do to help them. Well, why are they in this problem that they're in right now, not being able to get any work done? Think about redistricting. Think about how legislators in the majority have used this idea of drawing their own districts to their own advantage, so that even when you vote, it doesn't really help anything, because you're no longer counted in that area that would give them the power that they need to, you know, push the agenda that you want. See, redistricting is not about, in my view, the people and what the people want. It's about that group in power and what they want and how they want to keep their power and their control. And so, you know, there's been a change with how districts are going to be drawn, and you got a chance to be a part of those groups of panels of people, you know, that start to discuss how they should be drawn and more equitably drawn. And so that way, when your legislators are picked and voted upon, you'll have a more even balance of people. You know, it used to be in the old days, you didn't mind if there was somebody that was a Democrat and a Republican, you know, there. You had different ideals, but they worked together across the aisle and they got something done. It's not happening like that anymore. It's obstructionist behavior from what I can see. It's no matter what the people say they want. What did you all vote for in the last election, where most of you said, we don't want this particular president? So you don't have them. So now the undercurrent is, let's redraw these districts this way. Let's change all of the voting laws to make it harder for people to even vote. That way we can control what we want to control. Now you got the Voting Rights Act in 1965 sitting there, but you got this undercurrent of people who have said you got to have 500 IDs. You might as well take a literacy test like it was in 1960. So, you know, one ID is not good enough. You got people getting rid of absentee ballots in various states, which has been used with no fraud, so they say, for years. Very little, minuscule, 1-2 cases. They can't point to anything. That's why all of the cases that were filed in various courts that were resolved by Republican-appointed federal judges and even state Republican state judges, all were thrown out because there was nothing to that. But there's this undercurrent to make you believe that we're going to change these laws because there's fraud. When the real idea is we want to get the majority. So we want to stop everybody who came out to vote in the city of Detroit and wherever. Remember how they came and they were really challenging the vote counts in Detroit and it was all wrong because everybody came out. That's the undercurrent that's going on here. You've got another thing that you got to look to educate on, and Representative Bolden mentioned it, and it was in my notes, is implicit bias. This is something that the judiciary is being trained about. We all have an implicit bias. And the question is, how do we come to terms that it's there? We might all look at somebody and say, her outfit looks this way. So, in your mind, then she must be this, that, and the other. Well, that's an implicit bias. Well, judges have it, and you have to try to get it under control because it's used in sentencing, and they don't know they're using it. So that means that a person of color or of a poor origin might be treated differently for the same crime with the same background than a person that doesn't appear to have monetary problems or might be of a different race. So implicit bias is that undercurrent that's going on that can affect the outcomes for justice and equality within the judiciary and even within the prosecutorial side of things, because the charging is done by a prosecutor and they have full discretion. So the question is, how does that implicit bias go into? Who gets charged what? Who gets plea bargained down because of the implicit bias that's involved? So you'll see probably more African Americans that can't get the plea bargain that others might get. And it might not be something that is known by the prosecutor that's offering it to be an issue. It just might be something that's under the radar. And so when you talk about under the radar, you got to look and stay woke, and you got to try to help get involved with these voting rights issues that are there. Just because Juneteenth was passed as a national holiday doesn't mean you got to be sleepy on it, because know that those same people that passed it are the same people that are trying to limit voting rights. And so you got to balance it out. Be happy about this, but teach people and get involved in your elective processes to the way that you can stop this undercurrent that's, I think, is going on.
If I could just add one thing really quickly that Judge Johnson touched on. Redistricting is going on right now. How many of you have been to a redistricting meeting?
Oh, you can get involved. You got to get involved.
Representation matters, and those lines matter. I sit in District 6. I'm represented by 3 different senators. If you look at these maps, you want to talk about gerrymandered. And gerrymandering, there was a great show that had it in Mississippi where at one time all the blacks lived in one area, and once they could vote, they cut that area into 4s, so they would never have any representation. So that's why redistricting is it's critical, it's huge. They say that they're an independent council. I hope that in my heart, but politics controls everything. And sometimes we have to raise our voices. I've been to some of the meetings. I've sent people to the meetings. If you see one anywhere, somewhere, try to attend or at least submit a map. Because, again, you may be represented by somebody who has no idea what the culture of your community is. And I've had that for the last 30 years in my district.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
We want to go. Okay. I want to. Malcolm X once said, "The white man would try to satisfy us with symbolic victories rather than economic equity or real justice." Do y'all feel like that we're seeing more symbolic change than actual change in this country?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I could, if anybody follows me on social media, I said something to that effect, and I'm happy that Juneteenth is being recognized. I'm happy that we're celebrating it, but in my opening remarks, this is a reflection that we still have a long way to go, and that systems of oppression still exist, and we need to, as Judge Johnson says, stay woke. And so for me, Juneteenth is a call to action, but it's been made to be kind of a symbolic gesture. But that's up to us. we determine whether something is a symbolic gesture or whether we're going to push the needle forward to make sure that we actually have the systemic change that we're all wishing to see.
I'll quickly say yes, and the symbolism of a holiday is a good thing. And for those of you who you love that stay woke, I've never been asleep. So as a black man, I might take a nap, but every now and then. But what we have to look at is what comes next. And not to use an example, but we saw what happened with the Asian hate crimes, how quickly that was addressed.
Yep.
So we need to be aware of, okay, you got a holiday. Okay, that's good. I need some meat. I need some changes. I need it all. I don't want to reach back and 3 years from now and say, well, President Biden, what did you do? Well, I gave you a holiday. You could have kept that holiday. I need some other things that are going to change, generations. So I agree, yes, but we still have a lot of work to do, and we got to do it together.
Yes, is my answer too. But if you think about it, every single gain that African Americans have made has been at first symbolic, and it just never trickled down. It's got to trickle down from where it started down to the masses of people. Like the slavery, the 13th Amendment, that was symbolic because it didn't have any real effect for years. So, and think about the movements that came along over all of these years, civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, anybody you can think of. All of those things came together as a concerted whole to push this agenda to where we've gotten it now. So, yes, everything starts pretty much symbolic because people resist change. This country was founded upon some pretty racist notions. I mean, it's supposed to have been an open, we're moving away from Britain, we're religiously open. But by the time they tried to enslave Indians, the Native American Indians, by the time they, did enslave African Americans, it wasn't founded upon the words that it was written on the paper, which all men are created equal. So that was symbolic. So everything about this country started symbolic, and the people like you got together and said, we're just not going to have it. A lot of blood was shed, a lot of people died, but change came. And change came to the point that enough people in this country elected an African-American president. That was symbolic in a way, too, because they blocked him from doing anything once he got there. But it still happened. So we're still pushing forward. So don't give up the fight. Don't give up the hope. Like I said earlier, I thought about it. It's a reminder that words alone don't deliver freedom or individual rights and equal justice for all. And it's a reminder that our nation has come a long way from slavery, but much more work remains undone. Keep hope alive, Jesse Jackson.
That was very thankful for y'all to do that. Obviously, we got to address, the racial history in this country that has happened before and still does today, and to also put pressure into, everybody who is working for United States, especially, trying to make sure that George Floyd Act, gets passed real quick, and also the anti-lynching bill. So I appreciate the panel for being here and to address about Juneteenth and the history of this country. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I just have to say one thing, and I know you're trying to close it out, but for Juneteenth, and my colleague here was a co-sponsor, I did introduce anti-lynching and anti-noose legislation, and I'm looking forward to seeing how my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will bring it through the legislature. So it would make lynching a separate crime, as well as hanging a noose for the purposes of hate and intimidation. Just wanted to say that.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all our panelists, and thank you, Jabari. I really appreciate it. A round of applause for all of them. Thank you all for coming out.